Welcome to the 7th grade civics lesson on international conflicts. For this video, we will be focusing on Standard 4.3, how the United States has dealt with international conflicts. To follow along and participate, you will need notebook paper and a writing utensil. If you joined us for our last video, have your notes and independent practice to review. During our last video, we explored international organizations. Your independent task was to write about this concept circle and explain how the four terms fit together. The terms were governmental international organizations, the United Nations, non-governmental international organizations, and the Red Cross. Governmental international organizations are groups governments can join, and non-governmental international organizations are the opposite. Governments cannot join. The United Nations is a government organization that was created to keep worldwide peace and develop relationships among nations. The Red Cross is an international organization that promotes humanitarianism or the concern for the human race. Your answers should have reflected these definitions and could vary on how you made connections between the terms. Let's review from the last video on international organizations. This question asks for the organization that gives legal advice to the UN and handles international legal issues such as a disagreement about borders between countries. Is it the United Nations or World Court? This is describing the World Court. This organization works with the United Nations on world peacekeeping. The next review question is about the international organization that was founded to protect human life and health, to promote respect for all human beings, and to help people who suffer because of war or natural disasters. Is this the Red Cross or NATO? NATO is the North Atlantic Trade Organization, and this example is not discussing trade, so it must be the Red Cross. Don't let the acronyms trick you into picking the incorrect answer. Now, let's discuss international conflicts. International conflicts are different countries that do not have the same perspective on an issue. We are learning about these international conflicts to find out why the United States became involved and the impact of involvement. First, let's discuss domestic versus foreign policies. Domestic policies are the nation's plan for making laws and policies that affect people in the United States. Foreign policies include a plan for diplomacy or trying to keep good relationships with other nations and deciding on which countries to form an alliance with. The government sometimes makes treaties or formal agreements with other nations on issues like trade and defense. The first international conflict to discuss is World War I. World War I started in 1914, but the United States did not get involved until April 1917, when President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war against Germany because the German Navy attacked British submarines and ships carrying U.S. citizens. This was a war between the Allied powers, including Russia, France, the British Empire, Italy, the United States, Japan, Romania, Serbia, Belgium, Greece, Portugal, and Montenegro, and the Central Powers included Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. The war ended in 1918, and the United States went into a period of isolationism, focusing on domestic affairs. The next international conflict to discuss is World War II. World War II started in 1939, but the United States did not declare war on Japan until December 1941, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, a Navy base in Hawaii. The Allies were the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, while the Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. The war lasted until 1945 and involved most of the world's countries. The creation of a new peacekeeping organization, the United Nations, was a large impact as a result of the war. The next international conflict discussed is the Korean War, which started in 1950. This was a war between North and South Korea because North Korea invaded South Korea to spread communist rule. The United States got involved, among other United Nations forces, to keep communism in Asia and stop it from spreading. The Bay of Pigs invasion was an international conflict that happened in April 1961. The Bay of Pigs is the coast of Cuba in the Caribbean Sea. It was the site of an attempted invasion of Cuba by a group of people who were against the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. The United States led this invasion to try to stop the threat of communism so close to the United States. In October 1962, there was a lot of tension between communist and non-communist nations, causing the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union decided to put missiles in Cuba to threaten the United States. As a result, President Kennedy threatened military action. After a 13-day standoff, the United States and the Soviet Union reached an agreement to remove the missiles from Cuba. The next international conflict is the Vietnam War that ran from 1955 to 1973. This was a military conflict between the communist forces of North Vietnam, which was supported by China, and the Soviet Union, and the non-communist forces of South Vietnam, supported by the United States. The U.S. was involved to stop communism from spreading in Southeast Asia and to help an ally. The United States believed in the domino theory, meaning if one country fell to communist rule, other countries would quickly fall, just like a row of dominoes. In 1973, the United States finally signed a treaty to withdraw its forces. The Iran hostage crisis from 1979 to 1981. This crisis started when a group of Iranian students supporting the Iranian Revolution took over the U.S. Embassy in Iran. They held 66 U.S. diplomats hostage for 444 days. The diplomats were finally freed on January 20th, 1981. The First Gulf War was a military conflict between 1990 and 1991 between Iraq and a group of 34 nations, including the United States, Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others. The war was approved by the United Nations and led by the United States. Saddam Hussein, the dictator in Iraq, invaded Kuwait, and the United States then forced Iraq out of Kuwait. Another international conflict was sparked on September 11, 2001. Terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes in the United States and flew them into the World Trade Center in New York City and into the Pentagon near Washington, D.C. Another plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. Over 3,000 Americans lost their lives as a result of this attack. The terrorist group that led these attacks was Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. The U.S. military and its NATO allies responded by invading Afghanistan with the help of allied forces of the Afghani people when the Taliban refused to hand over Al-Qaeda leaders. Together, they removed the Taliban from power in Afghanistan. The last international conflict of study is the Second Gulf War, lasting from 2003 to 2011. This conflict was started by the United States, Great Britain, Poland, Australia, Spain, and other countries versus Iraq. The U.S. was involved to overthrow Saddam Hussein, who was believed to have weapons of mass destruction. Let's practice what we just learned in the Show What You Know question. During which conflict did the United States declare war on Japan? Was it A, the Korean War, B, Vietnam War, C, World War I, or D, World War II? The correct answer is D, World War II. Question 2 is a statement made by President Obama on August 18, 2011. What is the relationship between President Obama's statement and U.S. involvement in Syrian political affairs? Is it A, development of diplomatic alliances, B, support for the rule of law, C, economic development, or D, conflict resolution? The correct answer is B, support for the rule of law. To continue your practice on international conflicts, work on this concept circle independently. Write about your understanding by explaining the connections between each term in the concept circle. The terms in the circle are war, peacekeeping operations, humanitarian efforts, and conflict resolution. Answer the question, how do the terms in the concept circle fit together? Your answer should be 2 to 3 sentences. Thanks for joining and learning about civics. Our lesson content was provided by Civics 360. If you have an electronic device, visit civics360.org for more activities and practice.